Welcome to the most important week of the year for the podcast industry. Welcome to Podcast Movement 2025.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. I am hoping that I can get a little bit of help with the title session of this next session here. Why bigger isn't always better is something that as a British person I can pronounce, but I'm going to ask each of the panel in turn how to pronounce that word beginning with N, because I pronounce it a different way, it turns out. So let's meet the panel while we talk about whether size actually matters. Sitting next to me is Arielle Nissenblatt, Head of Community and Content, Pinwheel by Orderly. Firstly, how do I pronounce the N word?
You don't.
Not that one. That one.
It's nailing, James.
Nailing.
I'm just
yes.
kidding. I say niche.
Niche. Good. You've done it correctly. Pinwheel by Orderly. Who? What is that?
I help podcasters. No, I help people become podcasters. Not really people so much who are here per se. You could be here, but mostly people who have businesses that don't currently have podcasting as part of their strategy. I try to help them figure out how to make it part of their strategy and then how to help them do that in a sustainable way so that they're not just making a show and then burning out after 6 episodes.
Among Arielle's other jobs, founder of EarBuds Podcast Collective, very good newsletter, earbuds.audio, you should go there. You're host of Daily Tips That May or May Not Help You, which is a video podcast. By the way, if you're playing the game, I've now said the word video, so that's one extra drink that you have to have this evening. And Trailer Park, the podcast Trailer Podcast as well. And you run a company doing walking tours in NYC. So this time next year, of course, we'll be coming to your town, so you can show us all around. Which
yeah, I
should be
plan
fun.
to do a podcast history tour. You know, all of the offices that once were, but also good stuff as well.
Here's where Wondery was. Yes. Here's where Gimlet was. Wow. Okay. Sitting next to you, Stephanie Andrews, who is VP of Product at Quill and Cohost. I'm sure that everybody knows who Quill and Cohost are, but just in case we have new people here for this session, who are Quill and Cohost? What do you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So Quill is an agency that works with Fortune 500 companies to start their shows from inception to growing them on the listening apps, and Cohost is our hosting and prefix product that helps us measure the success of our advertising campaigns.
And nailing your
Oh, niche.
Niche, correct. And John Goforth is VP and GM of Gamut Podcasts. Who's Gamut Podcasts, John?
We are a podcast network. We are backed by Hubbard. We're under the Hubbard Broadcasting umbrella, but we're kind of a separate arm of the company, and we have a lot of homegrown podcasts. Please check it out. GamutPodcast.com, but we also sign creators to be partners with as well.
Are we all going to agree on how to pronounce this word?
I say niche, but I was in a meeting not too long ago, and somebody used the term niches get riches, and I liked that, but it won't force me to say niche. I'm going to say niche.
Excellent. Hubbard is a family-run business still, isn't it?
102 years, the same name on the side of the building. Yeah, absolutely. Jenny Hubbard's our CEO, and it's I've been in a lot of different places, and had to from the biggest to the big, the corporate, and being at a family-run business it's just refreshing. It's really nice.
I did some work for Hubbard a couple of years ago, and it's something else when you go to a conference and you talk to people in a business, and then at dinner, Ginny Hubbard comes around and she asks you, how you are and everything else, and you go, "Wow, this is a company that really, it's properly family focused," which is great.
Jenny's never once asked me about revenue, but every time I see her, she asks about my son's little league team. So yeah, that's how I knew I was in the right place.
How are they doing?
They won. I mean, he's 7, so
Well, let's get going. That's the panel. What does niche actually mean to podcasters? And how do you know when you are doing a niche show? I'm going to ask you, Arielle, first, just because you're sitting next to me.
Lovely. I think when we're talking about niche shows, we're talking about niche interests, and we're not necessarily saying that it's niche just because we don't have a big audience. I think it's kind of tempting to say, oh, I don't have a lot of listeners, therefore I am niche. I think it is a choice for you to make when you are creating your content plan and you are thinking about your audience, which is probably the thing that you should do first before you make the content, and then also start listening to other podcasts and consuming other media in that niche or in that topic area, and then figuring out within that how you're carving your own niche. And a niche can be topic specific, but it could also be like, I am a podcast person who is going to focus my podcast about podcasts on podcast trailers. That is a niche within a niche. And I very specifically wanted to do that because it ends up ultimately pointing back to me as a person in the podcast space. I know that this show will never have 100,000 downloads an episode, but it will work to get people to hire me to help them make trailers.
John, you work for a broadcaster. Clearly, broadcasting is to attract as many people as you possibly can to the FM or the AM signal that you own. How much friction does that cause within the business if you're talking about producing a niche podcast rather than something that will appeal to everybody out there?
Well, one of the things when I'm talking to our creators, our DJs, I always tell them, a podcast isn't just your afternoon drive show, the snippets in between the songs kind of mashed together, and we call it a podcast and we check the box. You might have had something interesting to say. Let's sit down at the mic for 20 minutes after your show and make a real podcast. In terms of niche, I kind of start with the audience, and who are we trying to attract, and what kind of content do we want to create for that audience? On the most basic level, if you can create content that only gets 10,000 downloads an episode, but it's all CTOs, you're going to have a really easy time selling that to IBM for an astronomically high price, right? Because it's the right audience. But I also think something that's really overlooked in our industry is a different type of niche, and that is locality. We all at conferences like these think of smart lists. We think these big shows with audacious audiences. And, there's a lot of value in providing local content to people that are in that area. And that's what radio built its business off of for a century. Now, people can argue the direction that's heading. 10 years ago, it was a $20 billion industry. Now it's a $14 billion industry in the U.S. So it's not going the right direction. But the lesson that we learned there doesn't need to be lost on podcasts, and that is that people in their municipality, in the area they live in, want to hear about their local sports team, their local news, their local weather, the events that impact their lives on a daily basis.
It's a community of common interest, isn't it? And that common interest can be local, but it can also be a community of, all of the exciting people selling their RVs at Jayco.
Yes, exactly.
They've got more coverage at this conference, I think, than many of the podcasts.
This is the third conversation I've had about RVs today.
Yes, which is a weird and wonderful thing. How do you know though whether niche is actually working? I mean, Stephanie, aren't all of your clients basically going, we want big download numbers? So how do you square that?
Yeah, so I think ultimately it comes down, like Arielle was saying, to the planning of the podcast, and it comes down to the outcome that you're trying to achieve for the show itself. Not necessarily every client that we work with wants huge download numbers. I think that's maybe a vanity thing that people can come up with in their own heads as to why that is a metric of success. But when people come to us, ultimately, we're like, well, what is the business objective? Are you trying to bring in leads? Are you trying to bring in brand awareness? Are you trying to sell sponsorships? Once you kind of qualify what exactly it is that you're trying to get out of creating the podcast to begin with, then you can think about nailing your niche. If it's selling sponsorships and you're really passionate about RVs, then maybe that is what you need to focus down on in the content strategy, and then look at qualifying that when you get the analytics back. There's lots of ways you can do that. Like there's the B2B analytics that we have with job role and seniority, companies and industries that you can qualify, demographics. Location is another really great way of doing that as well. So yeah, it's about, I think, defining what your outcome is, creating content around it, and then measuring that impact and seeing whether or not that matches up.
And in terms of, I mean, obviously you can focus in on a particular subject, you can focus on a particular community of common interest. But how do you know when you focus too far? You know, if you've made something that's really too niche to build the kind of audience that you're looking for, you know, what's too niche? I don't know whether John, do you have any views on that?
Yeah, I can speak from the time that I hosted my own show for 7.5 years, and it was a comedy show about aliens. Our third co-host was an angry robot named Conspiracy Bot, so very tongue-in-cheek. But you know, you can talk about the broad. It was like the world of the weird stuff. Bigfoot, everyone likes that, right? Everyone wants to hear about that. Roswell, everyone wants to hear about that. But then you might find some kind of a story that was a little bit on the fringes. And the way I would always try to decide if we went too focused is I would just look at listen-through rates, get into Apple Podcast Connect or whatever, and like you see that drop off at minute 15, you're like, uh-oh, that one didn't hit. And I think it's taking the signals from the listener.
Arielle, do you have any other ideas of, you know, what becomes too niche and how you actually know that?
Yes. A lot of my job is convincing people to niche down. I speak with a lot of people who have heard the word podcast and they want to have a podcast. A lot of times just to say that they have a podcast, which is an okay reason to make a podcast. And often they want to have a show about the following topic, which I think is like the most popular topic ever in business circles. It's life shifts. Like what is the moment in your life that made you desire something else? So it's a storytelling show usually where you're talking with people and then you're maybe relating that to a career pivot. I have like 3 clients who have a similar version of this right now. And for me, I want to figure out what is the difference between those 3 shows that's going to make an individual person be interested in each of them separately, right? Like, I think ultimately you first and foremost need to figure out what your goals are. And also why you're making your show, other than the download numbers and maybe the dollars that will come with it somewhere along the line. And I think it needs to point to your business goals in some way. So when I'm working with these people and they want to monetize the show, they want the show to grow quickly, I'm often doing a lot of reality checking, and I'm doing a lot of, do you care that your downloads are going to come from one place, and does that place need to be RSS? Or can it also be that you're using the podcast as an anchor and then creating other pieces of content, derivative content, that will also drive people to your business? Because ultimately your business objective is not necessarily download numbers. It's probably for them to take an action on your website, like getting them to pay for an hour of consulting or something like that.
Or buy an RV, is I believe the
Yes.
thing. Stephanie, Cohost has a bunch of really useful analytics. They're analytics for podcasts that Cohost hosts, but also analytics for podcasts that Cohost doesn't host. You know, you can still go in there as well. Are those analytics useful to help you work out, you know, when a niche audience is engaged or not engaged, or how niche that audience is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think on Cohost in particular, we do have mostly, I would say, firmographic and demographic information. So if you're looking to go after a very particular audience subset, then it's very helpful in understanding, am I hitting the right audience and what is that right audience? But I think
so that's what, boys and girls, 25 or 45, that sort of information?
that sort of thing, exactly. So like household age, income, job title,
right. So it goes
seniority.
It goes as deeply as that. Mm-hmm. Can you tell what type of companies are listening as well?
Yep. Companies, industries, the locations of those companies, the episodes that they listen to. We can also filter all of that. So you can get very specific into who is specifically listening. But again, I think it comes down to the planning part, right? So when you're creating your podcast, what is the outcome that you're trying to create? If you are trying to hit a very particular audience, which I think is generally the goal most of the time, then you need to craft an ideal listener profile so then you know what to measure it against, right? Because we can give you who is listening, but whether or not that is the right person for you is up to you to decide, right?
That's interesting, and I guess from a monetization point of view, I mean, John, you know, you've monetized indie shows, you've monetized big shows. You're working for a large broadcaster as well. I'm guessing that quite a lot of advertisers just want to chase big numbers, but I'm guessing also that some advertisers want to chase that niche audience that you have as well. How do you convince advertisers that actually they shouldn't just be looking at massive numbers, but niching in too?
It starts, going back to what I said before, it starts with the audience. I'll give an example. We just launched a brand in Chicago last week called 312 Sports. It's a local sports podcast network on the back of a very talented and popular host in the market named Dan Bernstein. And we were able to, just the trailer has dropped so far, and it made it to number 6 in sports, number 110 overall, and it's a trailer for a local podcast. But the concentration of Chicagoans that care about that made that happen. So as a function of that, the concentration of advertisers in Chicago are very interested in that because they can reach that target demographic of theirs, in this case, men 25-54, to your earlier point, and they can do it with a high level of concentration as opposed to just buying a show because it has big numbers. These are the right numbers. These are the right people that they want to reach. And so as a function of that, we have active packages that have already been sold in the 6-figure range. And that's because they believe in, first, that host's ability to sell their wares, but then second, that audience's ability to buy it, and that they will show up there, and it's a highly concentrated number of them. So, and that's a locality example, but back to my earlier example, if it were CTOs, and you only get 10,000 downloads an episode, that's really, really valuable and easy to monetize. The hard part to monetize are the very generic shows, the show where you ask the podcaster what it's about, and it's like, oh, just me and my friends hanging out, we're really funny. You hear that a lot, and some of those do well, but those are much harder to monetize.
And you were talking about location and the benefit of talking to a particular area. I just sort of mentioned that there's a new thing in podcasting 2.0, the location tag, where you can actually just put the location of where the show is about or where the show is from into the RSS, so that in time, once lots of people have done that, then we'll be able to search for podcasts in particular places, which is going to be super exciting.
And there's a website that does that, right? That you're involved in?
There isn't actually anymore. No, it's gone away. It's gone away.
It was maps.fm, right?
Maps.fm.
It was really cool
Don't go there now. It's some weird.
I really tried to set you up for that.
Somewhere. I know. That's very kind of you. But if you use Buzzsprout, or if you use Blueberry, or there's a bunch of other RSS.com, there's a bunch of hosts who actually are already supporting those kind of tags as well.
And that's going to be
super
hugely
useful.
important for the growth of the industry.
I think it is, yeah.
If
Yeah,
you think
absolutely.
about it, I mentioned earlier, radio is a $14 billion industry. Everyone says radio is dead. It's still $14 billion.
Yes.
We're what, $2.5 billion, depending on who you ask?
Yeah.
What's the difference? Radio stations can sell to local and regional advertisers. We can't.
Yeah. So
Yep.
there's a big difference there, and I think that whole community of common interest thing is important. I mean, talking about communities, Arielle, you've built loads of communities. You seem to be a serial community builder with the newsletters you have, with the podcasts you have, and so on. How are you helping creators and brands understand that the right audience isn't necessarily the biggest audience?
A lot of it is an education play. I have conversations with, let's say, like 6 people per month who want to start a podcast or who have a podcast, and their podcast isn't doing what they thought it would do. And a lot of what I'm teaching them is different metrics to measure each month, because they are thinking the most obvious one, which is downloads. But again, listen through rate is great. What about your engagement rate? What about, and even within that, your engagement rate, you need to figure out what constitutes to you engagement. And I think that can be a lot of things. It can be people leaving you ratings and reviews. It can be people visiting your website after an episode drops. It can be people reaching out to you to talk about X, Y, and Z. It can be people joining your Slack channel or Discord channel or something like that. Or, like pick and choose whatever it is that you want somebody, whatever action you want them to take, and then guiding them in that way is really important. But a lot of the work that I do is dispelling that, we only got 500 downloads for this last episode that we dropped. And you hear this all the time in podcast movement and in podcast circles, but you'll hear tell me if you've heard this already today. That's probably 500 people more than you'd be talking to otherwise, and that's a pretty cool thing. So I think then you just need to figure out what those people actually want. But even to back up, I think realizing the reason for your podcast, like if it is that you are pointing to a business that you own and you want people to take an action that will hopefully one day lead to them spending money with you, that's very different than I have a podcast with my friends and I like to make people laugh, or I have a podcast with one friend that I don't get to talk to otherwise, and this way we keep in touch, plus we have a good time. It's like doing improv for people who might find it on the internet. The goals there are very different. And it might not be that you want your show to be niche in that case, but I think ultimately what we want to do from when we're selling people on having a podcast, and we're hoping that they come to us month after month to re-up, or however often this is, their contract is up. What I want to do is make sure that they are getting something that I can point to for every single episode that drops, but every single quarter where we can review things.
I'm going to be. I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you for your favorite sort of niche focused podcast. All of you, by the way. So this is just a notice because I'm going to give one of the really interesting stories that I heard, which was a guy that is making podcasts for people who install air conditioning units. And you think that is properly niche, that is properly targeted. But he realized, he did some research to work out how long those people are spending in the car or in the van driving to install. He realized that there was a real opportunity there because people were spending up to 1.5 hours a day driving to jobs to do their installs. So realized that was a benefit. And then also suddenly started realizing that air conditioning unit companies, this was a perfect audience for them. And there's a great article about it, I think by Stephen Goldstein in the New York Times a while ago, where he focuses on how much this particular AC, podcast ended up earning over a year. But you were talking, 7-figure sums. And I'm not including cents in there, like proper 7-figure sums. So, Arielle has one.
Can I share? Because I think I'm going to forget. I had a point that I wanted to make before that I was dancing around in order to try to get my brain back to it, but here we are. Okay. There's a guy here, and he might be here, but he told me he already knows about niche podcasts, so he didn't need to come to this, and it's true. Tom Fox has a network called the Compliance Podcast Network, and it's all about, tax compliance. And the people on there do well. There's another one called the Health Podcast Network. And that one is interesting. They're doing an event October 1st and 2nd virtually. It's free. And I think it's an interesting thing to attend, not just for people who are doing health podcasts, but people who are doing niche podcasts in general, because that's definitely going to be a topic. But you asked before, how do you know if something is too niche? I think if you think you are too niche, that's when joining a network can be helpful, because then you can test things out by guesting on other shows in your network and maybe even running promo swaps with those to see if it's really too niche and you're really not getting anybody who listens to this type of show interested in checking out your show. Because ultimately we know that if you're interested in a topic, you are interested in things that are related to that topic as well. So if you have a podcast about tax compliance, but it's something really specific about some regulation in Texas about taxes, maybe that's too niche, but you can find out by guesting on another show and talking about that and seeing if some people from there go and check you out on your show.
Yeah, really interesting, really interesting. And there was somebody who I bumped into yesterday who's here somewhere, who makes a podcast about buying mortgages that have that people have defaulted on. So buying those mortgages and then selling them again. And apparently this is a thing. And he's just had his 1000th edition of that show and is doing fantastically well. Any examples that either of you can think of? This is an unfair question.
I am not placating, but Podnews Weekly
Bless you. Thank
because
you.
it's the industry I work in, and what I think you do a really good job of, you and Sam, is taking definitive stances. I hate milquetoast content that won't actually give an opinion. We all work in this industry. My opinion isn't always going to be the same as yours, but you have one, and I think we need more of that in our industry, to call out things when they're bad and call out things when they're good, and I really enjoy it, and it's the industry I work in.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, Podnews is a great example. I was going to say you're like the perfect person for the niche podcast panel.
This is a brilliant person. Excellent.
But yeah, I mean, similar. I've seen networks out there. Work Defined as a network that was specific to HR only shows, and they had about 30 different HR shows and only sold to companies that specifically sold to like HR professionals. Another example I can think of was I once came across a dentist podcast, and it was like a dentist talking about dental surgery and all of these very niche dentistry things. Very riveting, I'm sure, to the general public. But for dentists, great. So they had a very dedicated audience of dental practices, and were able to sell a ton of sponsorships to dental softwares, dental technologies, x-rays, that kind of thing. So really valuable.
There was one that I heard about a couple of years ago, which was a podcast for Uber drivers in Brisbane. And you think, well, actually, Uber drivers, again, perfect, because they've got time in the car. They can listen to whatever they want to listen to in between jobs. And actually knowing this weekend there's an RV conference going on. Knowing that sort of information, super useful. So, lots of really nice niche show ideas. Let's end on a prediction for the future, but also, I guess, a question for where we should be going next. How do you see niche content growing in podcasting as we move forward? Will it be growing? But also, what could we be doing in the podcast industry to help that? John, can I go for you first?
Well, I kind of telegraphed my answer here, but I think the biggest growth will be in local and regional content. It's just something that has not. We're still a nascent industry, and we haven't gotten there yet, but we will get there, and we're starting to get there. And not just Gamut, other companies are doing it as well, and I think that's the future, both from a revenue perspective and from an audience perspective. So that's the direction I see it headed.
Arielle.
I think the definition of podcast is changing, will continue to change. And I think we see that a lot where, you scroll on your feed and you see people with a microphone in front of them. And that doesn't have an RSS feed per se, but it's still a podcast, to them. And maybe that's all that's needed. And I think ultimately we are going to continue to understand that this is an evolving term, which is important because we're finally in a place where the word podcast is everywhere, and more people are listening to / consuming podcasts. And because of that, we have an opportunity to really hit people in their very specific interest group and to sell to them really specific products. So I think we're going to see more and more products starting to advertise in podcasting, but part of that starts with us really being able to educate them on why smaller or why bigger isn't always better.
And Stephanie.
I mean, I agree with everything that you said. I think also it's just the more content that's going to be out there, the more it's going to be of utmost importance to understand how you're going to be the best, the first, or different within a category. And so from a content perspective, you're going to have to think about how you're going to carve out your own little path within a particular genre. And so the more shows that are out there, the more niches are going to be created. And then to Arielle's point, ideally, the more monetization will also be able to be created because we're able to target very particular listeners. And so I think we're going to see a lot of advertising that is very targeted to particular folks. And so hopefully that will appeal to a broader range of folks.
But it has to be done well. I think there's going to be an initial kind of gut reaction of, let's use AI. We just want to reach dental hygienists. AI can produce a 10-minute podcast for them. It's almost like saying my audience isn't that important to give that much thought to it. Just let AI do it. I still think no matter how small the target is, there has to be love and care and consideration that goes into the content.
Yeah. Well, we've learned an awful lot about niche podcasts. I think an awful lot about what you can do podcasts for. as long as you're not chasing massive numbers. Actually, massive numbers in a niche is still really important. But please join me in thanking all of our panel, and thank you for coming. Thank you so much.